The boy on the porch had no shoes. His lips were cracked open and bleeding. The empty canteen in his small hand had not held water in 3 days. The man inside that house had not opened his door to another living soul in 3 years. He had not spoken his wife's name. He had not said his dead son's name out loud since the morning he buried them both. But what that barefoot boy was about to whisper through cracked lips, in a voice that was barely a voice at all, would change every one of those things within the next 10 minutes. Because 2 miles east, across a creek that was nothing but cracked earth, now a 4-year-old girl was running her last fever, and the mother was praying her final prayer. This is the story of the night a 9-year-old boy walked himself half to death across a drought to find a stranger who might still remember how to care. The boy on the porch had no shoes. His lips were cracked open like dried earth in late August, split right down the middle of the lower one, with a thin line of blood that had stopped bleeding hours ago because there was no water left in him to bleed. And the empty canteen in his small hand had not held water in 2 days, maybe 3, the cork still hanging from its leather thong, like something that had given up trying. The man inside that house had not opened his door to another living soul in 3 years. He had not spoken his wife's name out loud since the morning he buried her. He had not walked past the second door on the right of the hallway without holding his breath. He had not looked at the tin cup on the kitchen shelf with his son's name scratched into the side of it, and he had not, in all that time, found one good reason to keep doing any of those things, except that stopping seemed harder than continuing. But what the barefoot boy was about to whisper through cracked lips in a voice that was barely a voice at all would change every one of those things within the next 10 minutes. Because somewhere 2 miles east across a creek that was nothing but cracked earth, now a 4-year-old girl was running her last fever, and the mother was praying her final prayer on her knees beside that fever, and a 9-year-old boy had walked himself half to death across a drought to find a stranger who might still remember how to care. His name was Silas Thorne. He was 82 years old this October, sitting on the same porch 40 years later in the first thin snow of 1924. And the boy he is about to tell you about, the boy who knocked on his door, is the only reason he is still telling stories at all. Silas Thorne in 1884 was 42 years old. He stood 6'4" in his stocking feet, which was a measurement that did not matter to anyone except the men he had occasionally fought, and he had not fought a man in 11 years. His shoulders were broad in the way a man's shoulders get broad when he has lifted things he had no business lifting for 30 years straight, fence posts and calves, and once in a snowstorm the body of his own father across 2 miles of frozen ground. His arms were the kind of arms that ended in hands you noticed before you noticed anything else, big and rough and scarred across the knuckles, with thick, capable fingers stained dark from leather, oil, and dirt that did not come off no matter how hard you scrubbed. His face was sun weathered, the way a man's face gets weathered when he has spent 30 winters and 40 summers on the open range, deep crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from squinting against the wind and snow and the summer light coming off the alkali flats. There was a faint old scar on his cheekbone where a horse had clipped him when he was 22, and another across his right eyebrow where his daddy had hit him with a belt buckle when he was 14, and Silas had never blamed his daddy for that scar because his daddy had been drunk and grieving and had not aimed for the eye. His beard was thick and dark brown, but the silver had started coming through at the chin and along the jawline 3 years ago, almost overnight, the way silver comes in on a man who has lost more than a man should have to lose in one season. His eyes were steel gray, quiet eyes, contemplative eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen real violence and had chosen every time it had been offered to him since to walk away from it instead. He wore what he had worn nearly every day for 10 years, a dark brown leather vest oiled and dust stained, layered over a faded sleeveless work shirt with the sleeves torn off at the shoulders because the original sleeves had given out the year Cora died and he had not found the energy to mend them. Charcoal gray canvas trousers, worn in and travel stained, held up by a wide weathered leather gun belt slung low on his hips with the holstered Colt that he had not fired in 3 years. Mud-caked brown leather riding boots, a cream-colored wide-brim cowboy hat, sweat-stained at the band, shaped by 10 years of weather, tilted just slightly forward over his eyes. A faded red bandana knotted loose at his throat, the color long since gone the way of every red thing in Montana. That was the man. That was the shape of the silence that opened the door that night. It was just past 9 in the evening on the 7th of September, 1884, the second year of the worst drought Montana Territory had seen since the white man started writing things down, and Silas Thorne had been almost asleep for the first time in 3 weeks. He had been lying on top of the quilt in the front room, because he could not stand to sleep in the bed anymore. The bed was too big, and it had been too big for 3 years, and he had known for 27 months that he was going to have to either burn that bed or sell that house, and he had not yet found the courage to do either one. The pounding on the door tore him out of that almost sleep the way a knife tears canvas. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, the rifle already in his hand, the breath already gone from his lungs. He crossed the front room in 4 long strides. He kicked the door open with his right boot because both his hands were on the rifle, and he raised the rifle to his shoulder, and his finger was tight on the trigger when he barked into the dark. "Whoever you are, you better start talking before I start shooting." Then he looked down. There was a child at his boots. Silas Thorne did not lower the rifle right away. He stood there for 1 long second with the barrel pointed out into the dark above the boy's head, his finger still on the trigger, his eyes adjusting, his mind refusing what his eyes were telling him. The boy was no more than 9. The boy had no shoes. The boy was lying on his side, one cheek pressed to the porch boards, an empty canteen still clutched in his fist, as if he had been afraid to let go of it even when he fell. The boy's lips were cracked. The boy's tongue was visible and swollen in his mouth where his lips had pulled open, and Silas Thorne knew that swelling. Silas Thorne had watched his own boy's tongue swell exactly that way 3 years ago, come November, in the last fever, on the last morning, and he had not been able to do a thing about it then. He had been able to do nothing. The rifle dropped from his hands. It hit the porch boards with a hollow clatter that he barely heard. His knees buckled before his mind caught up with them, and he was on the porch with the boy in his arms before he had decided to move. Son, son, you stay with me." The boy's head lolled against Silas's shoulder. His skin was burning. His skin was burning with that dry, hot fever burn that meant the last of the water in him was almost gone. And a child this size with a fever this high had hours, not days, before the fever took him the rest of the way. "Don't you do this. Don't you die on my porch. You hear me." He scooped the boy up into his arms. The child weighed nothing, nothing at all. Silas had carried calves heavier than this. He had carried fence posts heavier than this. The weight of a 9-year-old boy in his arms was a weight Silas Thorne had not felt in 3 years, and the body remembers what the mind has tried to forget. And he was inside the house and at the kitchen pump before he had decided to come inside the house at all. The water came cold and clean from the well that was still giving, even in the worst of the drought. Silas filled a tin cup with shaking hands, but the tin cup he reached for was the wrong one. He realized halfway through reaching for it that it was the cup with the name scratched into the side, the cup that had not been used in 3 years. The cup his hand had crossed 3 years of empty mornings to avoid touching, and he stopped. He set that cup down. He took down a different cup. He carried the boy and the cup to the front room. He laid the boy on the rug because the rug was the cleanest thing in the house. He sat down on the floor beside him. He propped the boy's head up against his thigh, and he tipped the cup to those cracked lips, a teaspoon at a time, the way Cora had used to do for Wesley when the fever came. The memory hit him in the chest like a boot, and he almost dropped the cup, and he gritted his teeth and kept pouring. Slow now, son. Slow. The boy coughed. He coughed again, a small thin sound, and then his throat moved and he swallowed, and Silas Thorne heard himself make a sound in the back of his throat that was half prayer and half curse, and entirely the sound of a man who had not allowed himself to want anything in 3 years, and had just allowed himself against his will to want this child to live. That's it. That's it, son. Slow. The boy's eyes fluttered. They opened. They were pale blue, and they were the color of glacier water in late spring, and they fixed on Silas Thorne's face with the dim, confused focus of a child who has been somewhere else and is just now coming back. He made a small, broken sound that was not yet a word. "You're safe," Silas said. "You're safe now." The boy worked his cracked lips. He tried again. "My sister." "Not yet. Drink first." The boy whispered. "She can't." "I said not yet, son. Drink." Silas tipped the cup. The boy drank. 3 more swallows, then 4. The throat working under the dirty skin, the fever still burning in the small hot face, but the eyes coming a little clearer with every swallow, the way eyes do when a body that has been told it was dying is suddenly told, instead, that it might live. "What's your name, son?" "Theo." The whisper, barely there. "Theodore Holloway." "All right, Theodore Holloway. I'm Silas. How long since you had water?" "Yesterday. Maybe. Maybe before." "How far did you walk, son?" 2 miles. Maybe more. I couldn't find the trail back at first." "Hush. Drink." The boy drank. Silas watched his throat move and counted the swallows, the way a man counts heartbeats. And somewhere underneath his ribs, a thing he had buried 3 years ago started to scratch its way back to the surface. He had not felt that thing in 3 years. He had thought that thing was dead. It was not dead. It had only been sleeping, and the sound of a small throat swallowing water was the sound that woke it up. Mr. Silas, the boy said, and his voice broke on it. Mr. Silas, please, my sister Evie, she's only 4 and she's hot. She's so hot Mama can't cool her down anymore. And Mama hasn't eaten in 2 days, so Evie could eat. And our creek, it ain't a creek anymore. Mister, it's just dirt. It's just dirt now. Silas Thorne set the cup down. Where are they? In the hollow, past the dead cottonwoods. There's a shack. It ain't much. Mama said nobody'd find us there. Nobody'd find you. Theo's eyes went wide. He clamped his mouth shut the way a child clamps his mouth shut when he has just said the one thing he had been told never to say. And Silas Thorne saw that look, and Silas Thorne understood that look, and Silas Thorne filed it away in the back of his mind for later, because right now the only thing that mattered was that there were 2 more people 2 miles from this house who had less time than this boy had. All right, we'll leave that be for now. Can you walk? Yes, sir. No, you can't. Sit. Don't move. You hear me? Yes, sir. Silas stood up. His legs felt like they belonged to a stranger. He turned toward the pantry, and his eye caught for a half second on the shelf above the stove. The shelf with the tin cup that had Wesley's name on it, and the shelf with the cufflinks his boy had worn to his last Easter service, before the fever took him, and the small carved horse that had been on the nightstand of the room he had not opened in 3 years. He looked away. Rifle, canteens, blanket, oats, salt pork, coffee, honey, the wallow-bark powder he had bought at the trading post the spring after Cora died, because he had thought in that black first year that he might still have use for it one day. He had not. It had sat on the shelf for 3 years. It would not have sat there one day longer. He moved. He moved faster than he had moved in 3 years. He pulled down the heavy oilcloth bag that Cora had stitched him the summer before the fever took her, and for one long second he stood there, with that bag in his arms against his chest, and his shoulders shook, and no sound came out of him at all. Then he packed it. Theo, he said. Yes, sir. Your mamma, she got a name. Margaret, sir. Margaret Holloway. Mama said folks call her Maggie. Maggie, all right. And your sister's Evie. Yes, sir. And your daddy's son. The boy was quiet for a long beat. The kind of quiet a child gets when he has not quite decided whether he is allowed to say what he is about to say. And Silas Thorne, who had been 42 years old for a a year and had been a father once for 4, recognized that quiet for what it was. Ain't got one no more. All right. He fell off a roof, mister, in Chicago 2 winters ago. Mama says he didn't fall, but I think he fell. Silas Thorne's hands stopped moving inside the bag. He made himself start them again. I'm sorry, son. Yes, sir. We'll talk about that another day. Right now, we are going to go get your mama and your sister some water, and we are going to do it fast. You understand me? Yes, sir. Can you ride? I rode once, on a plow mule, close enough. He hauled the bag over his shoulder. He knelt down. He lifted Theo Holloway against his hip, the way he used to lift Wesley when Wesley fell asleep at the supper table, and Theo's head dropped against his collarbone, and Silas felt the small hot breath on his neck, and the thing underneath his ribs scratched harder. Hold on to me, son. Yes, sir. The roan mare was already saddled. Silas Thorne kept her saddled at all hours of the day and night, because he had told himself every night for 3 years that he never knew which morning would be the morning he finally rode out and did not come back. She stood in the barn with her ears forward and her eyes calm, and she was the only living thing on the place that Silas had spoken full sentences to in 18 months. She knew his stride. She knew the weight of the bag. She did not know what was on his hip, but she did not spook at it because she was 12 years old, and she had carried a great many things in her time, and she had learned that whatever Silas Thorne put on her back was something he meant to bring home alive. He lifted Theo up onto her withers. He climbed up behind. He kicked her into a canter before the boy had finished gripping the mane. Which way? East, the boy said, his small body braced against Silas's chest, past the cottonwoods, past the big rock that looks like a bent old man. I know the rock. You do. I know every rock in this county, son. I have been riding it alone a long time. How long? Long enough. They rode. The night was cool and dry, and the stars were so close. They looked like they were sitting on the ridgeline. The roan's hooves struck the cracked ground in a steady drum, and Silas Thorne kept one arm clamped tight around the boy and the other loose on the reins, and he did not let himself think about Wesley. He did not. He would not. He thought about Wesley. He thought about the last morning. He thought about the small body in his arms and the way it had stopped being a body that wanted anything at all. And he thought about Cora's face when she understood what had just happened. And he thought about the silence in the house. for the 72 hours after that, and how he had walked out at sunset on the second day and stood in the middle of the dry pasture and not been able to make himself cry, and how he had thought that night that the not being able to cry was the sign that something inside him had broken in a way that was not going to mend. It had not mended. He knew that. It had only gone quiet. But the thing under his ribs was not quiet now. The thing under his ribs was scratching, and the small hot breath on his neck was not Wesley's breath, but his body remembered Wesley's breath the way a body remembers the first language it ever learned, and he held the boy a little tighter as the mare hit her stride. Mr. Silas. Yeah, son. You got a wife. No, son. You got children. Silas did not answer. Mr. Silas had a boy. Once. What happened to him? Same thing that's going to happen to your sister if we don't ride faster. Hold on. He kicked the roan. The mare jumped forward, and Theo made a small, startled sound and gripped the mane with both small hands, and Silas Thornable kept his eyes on the dark trail ahead and did not look down at the boy in his arms because he could not afford to look down right now. What kind of a man am I now? He thought. A widower, a rancher, or just a ghost still wearing his own boots? He did not know the answer to that question. He had not known the answer for 3 years. But the question, which had been an old question, was suddenly a new one, because for the first time in 3 years, the answer might not be the same one tomorrow as it had been yesterday, and that scared him more than the trail and the night and the riderless dark put together. Mr. Silas, Mr. Silas, why are you helping us? Don't ask me that right now, son. But I said, don't ask me that right now. Yes, sir. They rode. He saw the bent old man rock. He saw the dry wash where the creek used to run. He saw finally the crooked roofline of something that might have been a line shack 40 years ago and had been forgotten by everyone since. There, Mr. Silas, there, I see it. He pulled the roan up 30 yards short of the shack. He swung down and lifted Theo down beside him, and the boy's legs nearly folded under him, and Silas steadied him with one big hand against his back. Theo, listen to me. Your mama doesn't know me from Adam, and she's scared, and scared people do foolish things. You call out to her before we get to that door. You hear me? Yes, sir. Go on. Theo stumbled forward. Mama. Mama, it's me. I brought help. Don't shoot, Mama. Don't shoot. It's a good man. Silence. A long silence. The kind of silence that is not silence at all, but the sound of someone on the other side of a door deciding whether to live or die in the next 10 seconds. Then from inside the shack, a woman's voice, thin, wrecked, but fierce as a wire fence at the end of a long winter. Theo, Theodore Holloway, is that you? Yes, Mama. Is he? Is he alone? Yes, Mama. Is he armed? Silas Thorne called out before Theo could answer. Ma'am, my name is Silas Thorne. I have a rifle on my saddle and a knife on my belt, and I will drop both on the ground before I come within 10 feet of your door. You want me to do that, I will. A long pause, the kind of pause where Silas could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and the boys breathing beside him, and the wind moving through whatever was left of the cottonwood stand behind the shack. Drop them. He dropped them, the Colt and the knife in the dirt, hands open at his sides. Come forward slow. He came forward slow. He kept his hands where she could see them. He stopped 6 feet from the door. The door cracked open. A woman's face appeared in the gap. She was thin, in the way a woman gets thin when she has been giving her food away to her children. Low-cheeked shadows under her eyes that spoke of a week without sleep and a year without rest. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pinned up and falling out of itself. Her eyes were the same pale glacier blue as Theo's, and those eyes Silas saw immediately were the eyes of a woman who had not slept in a week and would not sleep tonight and would put a bullet through a man's chest without blinking if she had to. Where'd he find you? My porch, ma'am. Collapsed right there on my boards. How far? 2 miles, give or take. Oh, God. Her voice cracked once, just once. Then she pressed it flat. Oh, God, Theo. I'm all right, Mama. Get in here, both of you. Get in here now. Silas ducked through the door. He set the bag on a cracked table. The shack smelled of fever and old coffee and the bitter end of a mother's last strength. Then he looked at the bedroll in the corner and his throat closed. There was a little girl on it. She was so small. She was so small. Her hair was dark and damp against her forehead. Her breath was coming fast and shallow, the way Wesley's breath had come at the end, and for one terrible second Silas Thorne could not tell which child he was looking at. Ma'am, his voice came out wrong. He cleared it. Ma'am, my boy Wesley. He had this same fever 3 years ago. I I know what to do, ma'am. I know how to bring it down. I done it before, if you let me. Margaret Holloway looked at him. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a stranger who has just walked into her last hour on earth and offered her a hand. Her mouth trembled exactly once, Then she pressed it flat. You a doctor? No, ma'am. Then how you done it before? With my boy. Your boy? Yes, ma'am. And where's your boy now, Mr. Thorne? Silas held her eyes. He did not look away. He had been asked many things in his 42 years on this earth, and the price of each thing varied, but the price of this question had always been the same, and he had never been able to pay it. He paid it now. In the ground, ma'am, beside his mamma, 3 years this autumn. Margaret Holloway looked at him. Willow bark powder. Now. Yes, ma'am. He moved. He tore a strip off his own shirt and wet it from the canteen and folded it and laid it across the little girl's forehead. He mixed the powder in a cup with water and the finger of the honey he had brought, and he held the cup to the cracked lips a teaspoon at a time. Evie, Evie, sweetheart, drink for Mr. Silas. The child whimpered, a small thread of sound, but the throat moved. That's it. Good girl. Good, good girl. Maggie stood over him with her arms wrapped around herself. Her body was shaking. Silas could hear her teeth knocking together, but she did not sit down. She did not cry. She watched her daughter's throat swallow, and she watched the hand of a stranger holding the cup, and she did not allow herself to feel anything at all yet, because feeling anything yet would have killed her. How long she been like this? Silas asked. 3 days. Eating. Not since Tuesday. Drinking. Whatever I could boil out of the dregs in the rain barrel. The barrel went dry yesterday morning. Ma'am. Don't you, ma'am, me, Mr. Thorne. Don't you dare. Yes, ma'am. I am not a woman to be pitied. No, ma'am. I can see that. I did not ask my son to go find a stranger. No, ma'am. He walked 2 miles. Yes, ma'am. He walked 2 miles because I was too weak to stand up and do it myself. Her voice finally broke. She turned her face away fast and pressed her fist against her mouth, and her shoulders heaved exactly once and then stopped. Silas Thorne kept his eyes on the little girl. He kept spooning water and willow bark and honey. He gave the woman her dignity. He whispered almost to himself, but loud enough that she heard it, because he wanted her to hear it, because he wanted her to know that the weight of the next hour was a weight he had carried before, and a weight he was willing to carry again. I did this too late for my own boy. I am not doing it too late for yours. Maggie did not turn around, but her shoulders changed. The way shoulders change when a woman who has been alone for a year and a half hears for the first time a man speak in the voice of a man who has known what she has known. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she pressed her fist harder against her mouth, and she did not look at him, and she said in a voice that was almost steady, "Keep going, Mr. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am." "Ma'am, I got a question, and I'd appreciate a straight answer." "What?" "Who are you hiding from?" The silence that dropped into the shack was so heavy that Silas could feel it on his shoulders. The little girl's breathing in the corner, the mother's breathing behind him, the sound of his own pulse in his ears. "That ain't your business, Mr. Thorne. It is, ma'am. If whoever it is comes riding up while I am here, they won't." "Ma'am, with all respect, a woman does not hide a sick 4-year-old in a line shack without a good reason. I am not asking to judge you. I am asking so I know what gun to load." She turned her head. She looked at him for a long, long time, long enough that he watched her face decide 3 different things and set them aside before it landed on the truth. "Boston," she said finally. "Boston. My husband's mother, Beatrice Pemberton. She has money, Mr. Thorne. She has lawyers. And she wants my children. She got a reason. She thinks poor is the same as unfit. Is she right?" Maggie's eyes flashed. "Would you take that question back, Mr. Thorne? Or do you want me to put you out the door this minute?" "I'd like to take it back, ma'am." "Then take it." "I take it back." "Good." From the corner where he had collapsed against the wall, Theo said, his small voice exhausted but clear, "Grandma Beatrice is scary, mister." "Theo." "Hush. She is mamma." I said hush. Silas laid his palm against Evie's forehead. "Still hot. Too hot. But maybe not quite as hot as 10 minutes ago." "Ma'am, I am going to say something and you can take it any way you want. Say it." "My ranch is 4 miles west of here. It has a well that is still giving. It has a roof that does not leak. It has 2 bedrooms standing empty that have not been slept in since." He stopped. He made himself keep going. "Since a long time. I would like you and your children to come there tonight, just till the girl's fever breaks and you have got your feet back under you." "No, ma'am." "No, Mr. Thorne. Your girl is dying. I am aware of the condition of my daughter." "Then stop being proud and—" "Do not." Her voice cut. "Do not speak to me about pride. You do not know one thing about me, Mr. Thorne. Not one." "No, ma'am, I don't." "Then keep your opinions behind your teeth." "Yes, ma'am." A long silence. Silas kept spooning water. The little girl coughed once, then swallowed. Her breathing evened just a fraction, just a hair, just enough that a mother would notice. And Maggie did notice, and Silas saw her notice, and the room changed. "Mr. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am." "If I go with you to your ranch, and Beatrice Pemberton finds out where we are, There will be a man on a train from Boston within a week, and he will have papers, and he will take my children. He'd have to come through me." She laughed. It was not a laugh that had anything funny in it. "Mr. Thorne, you are one man." "Yes, ma'am." "One man alone on a ranch." "Yes, ma'am." "Against lawyers." "Ma'am, I have buried a wife and a son. There is not a lawyer alive who scares me." She stared at him. He held her stare. He did not look away. He did not soften it. He let her see exactly what was in his face, which was the face of a man who had said no words like these out loud in 3 years, and had just discovered that the words still worked. "Mama." Theo's voice from the corner, small and raw. Mama Evie's breathing slower. Maggie turned fast. She dropped to her knees beside the bedroll. She put her hand on the little girl's chest and she held it there. And Silas watched the tears finally spill down her cheeks, silent and hot, the kind of tears a woman cries when she has been waiting a year and a half to cry and does not have permission yet to make a sound about it. "She's cooling," Maggie whispered. "Yes, ma'am." "She's cooling, Mr. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am, she is." "Oh God, Evie. Oh, my baby." Maggie pressed her forehead against the child's. Her shoulders shook, and finally she made a sound, a small cracked sob that came up from a place so deep and so locked up that Silas Thorne understood in that one sound exactly how long she had been carrying this alone, and exactly what she had been willing to do tonight if he had not come. He stood up. He walked outside. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands, and he stood in the dry yard of that forgotten line shack under all those Montana stars. And he said very quietly to no one in particular, but in the direction he had not let himself look in 3 years. "Cora." "Wesley, I do not know what I am doing, but I am doing something. I am doing something." He put his hat back on. He went back inside. When Maggie Holloway lifted her face from her daughter's, her cheeks were wet but her jaw was set, and her eyes were dry already the way the eyes of a woman who has been alone too long get dry too quickly. She looked him full in the face. "Mr. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am." "We will come to your lunch." "Yes, ma'am." "Tonight." "Yes, ma'am." "But I am not a woman who takes charity." "No, ma'am." "I will earn every biscuit we eat under your roof." "Yes, ma'am." "And the moment my daughter is well enough to travel, we will leave." Silas Thorne looked at her. He looked at the boy, slumped against the wall, half asleep, with his cracked lips parted and his small chest rising in shallow, grateful breaths. He looked at the little girl on the bedroll, whose breathing was slowing. evening finding the rhythm that meant she was going to live through tonight after all. He thought about the empty bedrooms in his house. He thought about the tin cup on the shelf with Wesley's name scratched into the side. He thought about the 3 years of silence, and the wind in the eaves, and the sound of his own voice, answering his own questions across his own supper table. Yes, ma'am, he said. Whatever you say, ma'am. But something underneath his ribs, the thing he had buried, the thing that had started scratching the moment a barefoot boy had collapsed on his porch, that thing was not listening to Margaret Holloway. That thing had already made up its mind. What Silas Thorne did not know, riding back across that drought with Theo asleep against his chest, and Evie wrapped in his coat in her brother's small, careful arms, and Maggie behind him, in the saddle holding the back of his own coat, because he had told her plainly that a woman who did not know a man did not grab a strange man's belt. What he did not know, could not have known, was that the boy clinging to his coat front was going to speak words at the foot of a Helena court room in 14 days that would either save his sister's life or send her to Boston in a black dress. And Silas Thorne, who had not loved another human being in 3 years, was about to start loving one whether he wanted to or not. What he did not know was that the woman in the saddle behind him was hiding from a far worse storm than any drought. That somewhere in a mansion in Boston, a 62-year-old woman with white hair and a straight back and a face that had not broken in 40 years was already sending men with money and lawyers and federal warrants. That within 72 hours, the first of those men would ride up his road in a rented buggy with a derby hat and a Boston accent and a piece of paper he did not yet have the right to bring. And Silas Thorne would have to choose for the first time in 3 years between the safety of his silence and the lives of 3 strangers he had no business loving. He would have to choose what kind of man he was. He would have to choose whether to open the door he had not opened, say the name he had not said, and step out of the grave he had been digging for himself, one shovelful at a time, for 36 straight months. The roan mare carried them west under the stars. Theo Holloway slept against his chest. Evie Holloway slept in her brother's arms, with her small flushed cheek against the front of Silas's coat. Margaret Holloway rode behind him with her forehead pressed, once briefly, between his shoulder blades, and her breath catching twice before she got it back under control. Mr. Thorne, she said after a long mile. Yes, ma'am. If anybody asks you who we are. Nobody is going to ask me, ma'am. I have not had a visitor at the ranch in 2 years. 2 years. The widow Wainwright came by last spring with a pie. I did not answer the door. She left the pie on the step. Why? Silas was quiet for a long stretch of trail. The mare's hooves on the dry ground. The night round them. The weight of 3 small lives in his arms and on his back. Because if I had opened the door, ma'am, I'd have had to talk. And if I'd had to talk, I'd have had to say his name out loud. And I was not ready to say his name out loud. Wesley. He flinched. It was a small flinch. She felt it through his coat. Yes, ma'am. Wesley. I am sorry, Mr. Thorne. Don't be. You said it better than I have been able to say it for 3 years. They rode on in the dark. 40 years later, sitting on his porch in the first thin snow of 1924, Silas Thorne would tell his great-grandsons that he could still feel the weight of those 3 children against him on that ride, the weight of a boy asleep against his ribs, the weight of a girl whose fever had just broken, the weight of a woman's forehead between his shoulder blades just for one instant, the only touch she had let any man give her in a year and a half. He would tell them that he had ridden out that night a dead man, and that he had ridden home a man who had decided somewhere in the dark between the bent old man rock and his own front porch that he was not going to be a dead man anymore. He just did not know it yet. The roan mare's ears pricked forward. Silas Thorne could smell his own well from a quarter-mile out. That sweet green mineral smell that meant water, real water still running somewhere under the bone-dry ground. Theo stirred against his chest. Evie murmured in her sleep. Maggie's grip on the back of his coat tightened the way a hand tightens before a person walks into a room. They are not sure they are welcome in there. Son. Silas said quietly more to Theo than to anyone. You see it, the house. That is the house. It's a big house, Mr. Silas, the boy whispered. It was built for more people than live in it. Margaret Holloway said nothing. The roan walked the last 100 yards on her own. The yard came up around them gray under the stars. The porch dark, the front door still standing open from when Silas had kicked it open 4 hours ago. He swung down. He lifted Evie out of Theo's arms before Maggie could dismount, and he carried the little girl straight up the porch steps and into his own house, because he did not want to set her down. He did not want to slow his stride until that child was on a real mattress under a real quilt. Theo, help your mamma down, then follow me. Yes, sir. Silas Thorne strode through the front room without looking at the rocker by the stove, without looking at the bookshelf, without looking at the tin cup with the name on it. He turned left at the hall. He stopped at the second door on the right. His hand was on the latch. His hand stayed on the latch for a long, long moment in his own dark hallway, in his own dark house, with a 4-year-old girl in his arms, whose breath he could feel against the side of his neck. Silas Thorne. Thorne stood with his hand on a door he had not opened in 3 years, and waited to find out what kind of man he was going to be. Behind him, soft footsteps. Maggie. Theo behind her, his eyes huge. Mr. Thorne. Ma'am. What's wrong? Nothing, ma'am. Whose room is this? Silas did not answer. Mr. Thorne, whose room is this? It was my son's. Margaret Holloway went very still. I have not opened this door in 3 years, ma'am. Then don't. Ma'am, don't open it. Put her in your room. Put her anywhere. Don't open this door because of us. Ma'am. Silas. It was the first time she had said his name. He felt it in his chest before he heard it in his ears. You don't have to. He looked at her. His jaw worked. The little girl's breath against his neck. The door under his hand. The 3 years on the other side of that door. She needs a bed, Maggie. There are other beds. There is a bed in there. Silas. He opened the door. The air that came out was cold and still, and it smelled like cedar and dust and a small boy who had not slept in that bed for 3 years. Silas Thorne's eyes skated across the room without landing on anything. Not on the little carved horse on the nightstand. Not on the quilt with the blue star border that Cora had stitched the winter before Wesley was born. Not on the chair by the window where a mother had once sat reading stories until a small voice had asked, "Please, just one more." He did not look at any of it. He walked straight to the bed. He pulled back the quilt. He laid Evie Holloway down on the cool, clean sheet. The little girl made a small, sleepy sound and turned her cheek into the pillow. There, now, Silas said, and his voice was steady, and that was a miracle he would think about later. There, now, little one, you rest. Maggie's hand came down on his shoulder. She did not say anything. She just pressed once hard and then took her hand away. Mr. Thorne. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I am thanking you for the door. Yes, ma'am. I know what it cost you. Yes, ma'am. He walked out. He walked down the hall. He walked through the front room. He walked out onto the porch and down the steps and around the side of the house all the way to the woodpile. And there he sat down on a split stump and put his head in his hands and did not move for a long, long time. He did not cry. He had forgotten how, but his shoulders shook and his breath came rough. And somewhere in the stable, a barn cat meowed, once a soft, concerned sound, and Silas Thorne sat there with his hat between his knees until the stars overhead had moved a full hour across the sky and the first gray edge of dawn was beginning to ghost the eastern ridge. Inside the house, in the room he had not opened, a 4-year-old girl breathed slow and even on a quilt his wife had stitched for a son they had buried. Inside the kitchen, a 9-year-old boy who had walked 2 miles for water sat at the table eating bread and honey out of a tin plate that had not held food for another human being in 3 years. And Margaret Holloway, in his dead wife's apron, in the hallway of a house she had walked into less than an hour ago, stood very still with her hand against the wall, and she let the tears come, and she did not make a sound. She did not know yet that within 72 hours a man with a derby hat and a Boston accent would ride up that very road, that $100 reward had already been printed and posted in the town 15 miles north, that a federal hearing in Helena was already on the docket for 2 weeks from Thursday, and that the silent man sitting on the woodpile under all those Montana stars was about to do something so reckless, so beyond anything he had ever done, that the entire territory would still be talking about it 40 years later. She did not know any of that yet. Neither did he. Out in the dark on the woodpile, Silas Thorne lifted his head. He looked at the eastern ridge. He looked at the first gray edge of the morning that was about to come up over the country he had ridden alone for 3 years, and he said very quiet, almost a whisper, into the morning that was just beginning. All right then. He stood up. He put his hat back on his head. He walked back to the house. The door was still open. The first morning came gray and slow, the way mornings come on a ranch where someone has been awake all night, listening for a sound that did not come. Silas Thorne stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and watched the eastern ridge bleed a thin line of pink across the dry country. He had not slept. He had sat on the wood pile until the dawn, and then he had walked back up to the house, and then he had stood in the hall outside the room he had opened, and he had listened to a 4-year-old girl breathing on the other side of the door for 40 minutes before he had been able to make himself go anywhere else. She was breathing. That was the first thing. She was breathing, and the boy at his kitchen table was eating his second piece of bread, and the woman in his dead wife's apron was at his stove, and the world had gone on turning while he had been pretending it had stopped. He did not yet know what to do with any of that. Mr. Thorne. Yes, ma'am. You did not sleep. No, ma'am. You should sleep. I will, ma'am. Later. Margaret Holloway did not turn around. Her hands moved at the stove the way the hands of a woman move when she has stood at the stove every morning of her grown life, and could do it in her sleep if she had to. The smell of bacon, the smell of biscuits in the oven, the smell of coffee strong enough to stand a fork up in. He had not smelled biscuits in his own kitchen for 36 straight months. Theo, she said. Yes, mamma. Wash your face, your hands, then come back and finish your plate. Yes, mamma. The boy slid off the bench. He went to the basin Silas kept by the back door, and he washed his face and his hands the way a boy washes when his mother is watching, which is to say, with great seriousness and very little water. Silas watched him from the window, and he thought, almost against his will, that the boy looked smaller in daylight than he had looked last night by lamplight, and he thought that all children looked smaller in daylight, and he thought that he had not had a child in his kitchen at first light in 3 years. Mr. Thorne, sit down at your own table. I beg your pardon. You have been standing at that window for an hour. Sit down. Yes, ma'am. He sat down. The bench creaked under him the way the bench had always creaked, but the creak was different in a kitchen where someone else was cooking. She set a plate in front of him. 2 biscuits, bacon, a spoonful of honey on the edge of the plate, a second cup of coffee, hot this time, to replace the one he had let go cold. Eat, Mr. Thorne, ma'am. Eat. He ate. He ate slowly, the way a man eats when he has forgotten he is allowed to. Theo came back to the table and finished his plate. Maggie sat down at the third place with a single biscuit and a cup of weak coffee, and she did not eat the biscuit. She held it. She watched her son chew. She watched Silas Thorne chew. And Silas understood without having to ask that she was not going to eat that biscuit until she was sure that there were enough biscuits left for her children to have seconds, and he understood also, without having to ask, that this was a habit 1.5 years old, and he was not going to call attention to it on the first morning. Eat your biscuit, Maggie. There is flour in the pantry. There is more flour at the trading post. There is more flour in this country than there are mouths to feed. You eat that biscuit. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she ate the biscuit. She ate it slowly, but she ate the whole thing, and when she was finished, her hand came up to her mouth in a gesture that was not quite a sob and not quite a swallow, and exactly the thing a mouth does when it has not been allowed to taste honey in 15 months. The little girl down the hall woke at 9:30. She woke the way children wake from a long fever, dazed and quiet. And when Maggie went in to her, Silas heard the small voice from the bedroom say, "Mama, where are we?" And he heard Maggie answer, "We are at a kind man's house, baby. Drink your water." And then the little voice said, "Is the kind man here?" And Maggie said, "Yes, he is here." And then the little voice said something that Silas Thorne would remember for the rest of his life. She said, "Tell him thank you." Silas Thorne stood at the kitchen window with his hands flat on the sill and his head down, and he did not move for a long time. By the third morning, the fever was gone. By the fourth, Evie was sitting up against the pillows with a doll Silas did not remember owning, which Maggie had found in the bottom of a cedar chest he had not opened in 3 years, and had brought to the little girl without asking permission, and which Silas had not been able to bring himself to mention. The doll had been Cora's when Cora was a child. Cora had brought it west in a steamer trunk. It had been one of the first things Cora had unpacked into the new house, and one of the only things of her own girlhood she had brought with her, and it had sat in that chest in the dark for 3 years, and now it was in the small hands of a stranger's child. And Silas Thorne could not decide whether that was a wound or a mercy. He decided after a long morning of thinking about it that it was both. Theo took to the ranch the way some boys take to a ranch, the way Wesley would have taken to it if Wesley had lived to be 9. He followed Silas everywhere. He did not say much. He watched. He watched the way Silas saddled the roan. He watched the way Silas mended fence. He watched the way Silas fed the chickens. And on the second morning, he asked very quietly if he could feed the chickens. And Silas said, "Yes, son." And Theo fed the chickens for half an hour with the careful focus of a boy who had never had chickens to feed before and was not going to mess it up. On the third morning, Theo came to the barn with a piece of biscuit on the flat of his palm. He stood at the door of the Rowan's stall and held the biscuit out the way you hold a biscuit out to a horse. Silas on the milking stool, with a pitchfork in his hand, watched him. "Son." "Yes, sir." "Who taught you to hold a biscuit like that?" "Daddy, mister. Before. Before." "Yes, sir. He said you hold it flat so the horse don't bite your fingers by accident." "He said horses don't mean to. He said they just don't have teeth like ours." "That's right, son. They don't." The roan took the biscuit. She took it gently. Theo's small hand did not tremble. She licked the last crumbs off his palm, and then stood there with her ears forward and her dark eye on the boy, and Silas. Thorn watched the boy's small face in the lantern light of the barn and saw something he had not seen on a child's face in 3 years, which was the small private satisfaction of a child who has done a thing right and knows it. Theo. Yes, sir. Sit down. The boy sat down on an overturned bucket. Silas put the pitchfork against the wall. He sat down on a second bucket across from the boy, and he took his hat off and held it in his hands. The rowan watched them both from her stall, the way the rowan watched everything with patience and almost no judgment. Your daddy, he sang, didn't he? Theo's eyes got wide. How did you know that? You said so. The first night. I said so. You did, son. You said he sang in the mornings, while he was fixing his coffee. A song about a river. Theo's mouth opened a little. He looked at Silas, as if Silas had just done a small piece of magic. I forgot I told you that. You were tired, son. The boy thought about it. He looked down at his hands. They were small hands, cleaner now than they had been 4 days ago. The dirt under the nails was the dirt of a ranch, not the dirt of a dry creek bed. Yes, sir, he said. He sang. Down in the valley solo. He sang it almost every morning. I was too little to catch all the words, but it was always a happy song. It was always a happy song, mister. Silas Thorne felt his throat close. Cora used to sing that song. He did not say it out loud at first. He sat with it. He sat with the fact of it. A bookshop in Chicago and a kitchen in Montana, 2,000 miles apart. Two people who had never met singing the same hill country song to two children who had not yet been born when the song was old. He thought about that for a long time. Then he said it. My wife used to sing that song, son. Theo looked at him. Down in the valley. Yes, sir. She sang it to your boy. Yes, son. Every morning while she was making the coffee. The boy's eyes filled. They filled fast and full. Mr. Silas. Yes, son. What happened to your daddy? To my daddy. What happened to my daddy? Silas Thorne set his hat down on his knee. He looked at the boy across from him. He looked at the small hands in the small lap and the bare cheeks still rough with the wind of a 2-mile walk 3 days ago, and he understood with absolute clarity that the next sentence he said in this barn was going to be a sentence the boy would remember for the rest of his life. And he understood that he had to say it correctly the first time, because a boy this age does not get a second chance to hear it. Theo, listen to me. Yes, sir. What happened to your daddy was not your fault. The boy's chin trembled. You were 7.5 years old. You were sitting on the curb, waiting for your daddy to come down a ladder. You were not the reason he did not come down that ladder. You hear me? Yes, sir. Say it. It wasn't my fault. Again. It wasn't my fault, Mr. Silas. Again. It wasn't my fault, good son. The boy cried. He cried quiet the way a boy cries when he has been holding it for 2 years and has forgotten how to make noise about it. Silas put his big hand on the small shoulder and let him cry. The roan, who was wise about grief, lowered her great head over the stall door and breathed once on the boy's hair, and Theo Holloway shook under that breath, and he cried harder, and Silas Stone sat with him in the lamp-lit barn, and did not say another word for a long time, because there were no other words that needed saying just then. He did not know it, but Margaret Holloway had come down the path from the house 10 minutes earlier. She had stopped 20 feet outside the barn door when she heard their voices. She had stood there in the gray morning, with her hands flat against her own apron, and she had listened. She had listened to a stranger tell her son a thing she had been trying to find the words to tell him for 2 years, and had not found. She had listened to her son say it back. She had listened to her son cry. When the crying stopped, she walked very quietly back up the path to the house, and she went into the kitchen, and she put both her hands on the counter, and she lowered her head for a long moment, and she did not make a sound. Then she dried her eyes on the corner of Cora Thorne's apron, and she started kneading bread. Silas Thorne had been a man with a routine. 3 years of widowhood will do that to a man. He had risen at the same hour. He had drunk his coffee at the same hour. He had ridden the fences at the same hour, and he had eaten his supper at the same hour, and the routine had been the thing that had carried him from one morning to the next when nothing else had. The Holloways broke the routine. They broke it the way a small flood breaks a dry creek. They broke it on the second day when Theo asked at supper if he could say grace, and Silas, who had not said grace in 3 years, had set his fork down and bowed his head, and Theo had thanked the Lord for the bread and the meat and the well water, and then in a voice that was very small, had thanked the Lord for the man who had opened his door when nobody had to. Silas had not eaten for a full minute after that. They broke it on the third day when Evie, sitting up in bed for the first time, asked her mother if the kind man had a name, and her mother had said, "Yes, baby, he is Mr. Thorne," and Evie had said, in the bright, clear voice of a 4-year-old, "Mr. Thorne, can you come here?" And Silas had walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of the room he had not opened in 3 years, and the little girl on the bed had lifted up both small arms toward him the way Wesley used to lift up both arms when Wesley wanted to be picked up, and Silas had stood there for a long moment unable to move. And then he had gone into the room, and he had sat down on the edge of the bed, and the little girl had put her small, hot hand against his rough, scarred one, and she had said, "You are a kind man, Mr. Thorne," and she had said it like a fact she had decided was true, and Silas Thorne had not been able to answer her for a long time. They broke it on the fourth day when Theo at the corral asked if he could learn to shoot. Silas considered him, the boy's hands, the boy's small straight back, the boy's serious face, the boy's father dead 2 winters now, the boy's grandmother on the way west with men and money and lawyers. Your mama, he said, will have opinions. I know. You think you can handle your mama's opinions? No, sir. Good answer. He took the boy out behind the barn. He set an old tin can on the top rail of the back fence. He put the rifle in the boy's hands, and he showed him how to stand and how to breathe and how to squeeze rather than pull, and Theo missed the can on the first try, and the second, and the third, and on through 11 misses, and on the 12th try, Theo Holloway put a clean hole right through the middle of that can, and the can jumped off the post and spun into the dry grass. And the boy looked at Silas Thorne with his pale blue eyes, white as silver dollars, and said, "Mr. Silas, did I?" "You did, son." "Can I do it again?" "One more. Then we go talk to your mama." He did it again. He put a second clean hole through the can on the 13th shot, and his small face turned up toward Silas with an expression that was not pride exactly, but something deeper than pride, the expression of a boy who had just learned that his hands were good for something he had not known they were good for. And Silas Thorne felt the old thing under his ribs scratch hard at his rib cage, and not stop scratching for the rest of the afternoon. They walked up to the house. Maggie was on the porch with her arms folded. Silas Thorne. "Ma'am, did you just teach my 9-year-old son to fire a rifle?" "Yes, ma'am." "Without asking me?" "Yes, ma'am." "I ought to take a skillet to your head." "Yes, ma'am." She stood there with her arms folded and her jaw tight. Then something cracked in her face. It cracked very small. "Did he hit anything?" 12th try. Dead center. Then again on the 13th. Maggie looked at her son. The boy's small chin came up. Not bragging, just steady. "Theo." "Yes, Mama." "Your daddy would be very proud." "Yes, Mama." "Go on inside. Your sister wants to see you." The boy ran. Maggie watched him go. She did not lower her arms right away. Then she did. She let them fall to her sides, and she turned to Silas Thorne, and her face was the face of a woman who had just made a decision she had not known she was about to make. Silas, ma'am, if that man comes up our road, if Beatrice Pemberton's man comes up our road, I want you to know something. Yes, ma'am. I can shoot. Silas had figured that, ma'am. I want you to know I will. Yes, ma'am. And I will not aim at his shoulder. No, ma'am. She held his eyes a moment longer. Then she went inside. That was the fourth day. The man came on the fifth. Silas heard the hoof beats before Maggie did. He was on the front porch with a piece of harness in his hands and an awl in his teeth, mending a strap that had needed mending for 9 months and had the day before finally given up. He heard the hoof beats from a quarter-mile out. One horse, a buggy, not a saddle, light wheels. Maggie. She was in the doorway before the word was finished. I see him. Take the children. Silas. Take them, Maggie. The root cellar. Bolt the trap. Do not come up no matter what you hear. Silas, if he shoots you, he is not going to shoot me. He is a lawyer's errand boy. He does not carry a gun. You do not know that. I know his kind, Maggie. Go. She went. He heard the cellar trap drop into place. He heard the bolt slide. He heard very faintly Theo's small voice saying, Evie, it is all right. Evie, I have got you. And then the knock came. Silas opened the door with the rifle in his hand and the barrel low. Not pointed, not yet. The man on the porch was not what Silas had been bracing for. He was soft around the middle. He was clean-shaven. He was 35 years old, give or take, with a cream-colored derby hat and a black wool coat, and the kind of boots that had never walked on a road that did not have a sidewalk under it. He had the long, careful face of a man who was paid to be careful with his face. Good afternoon, sir. Afternoon. I am looking for the Thorn Ranch. You found it. Are you Mr. Silas Thorne? I am. My name is Edmund Ainsley. I represent the legal interests of Mrs. Beatrice Pemberton of Boston, Massachusetts. Silas Thorne did not move. That a fact. I have reason to believe, sir, that a woman by the name of Margaret Holloway, along with her two minor children, may be in residence on your property. You have reason to believe. Yes, sir. Whose reason? A gentleman at the livery in town, sir, a Mr. Wilcox. A horse was sold 2 weeks ago to a drifter. The boy with the drifter was wearing oversized boots. Silas set the awl down. He did it slow. He did it so the man on the porch could see the oil going down on the porch rail, and he did it so the man on the porch could see his right hand come empty of the oil, and he did it so the man on the porch could see his right hand was now closer than the oil was to the rifle. Mr. Ainsley. Yes, sir. I am going to ask you one question. I want you to think about your answer before you give it. Yes, sir. Do you have paper? Sir. Do you have a paper signed by a judge in this state? Not Massachusetts. This state, Montana Territory, that says you can set foot on my land. The lawyer Edmund Ainsley opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the rifle leaning against the porch post which Silas had not yet touched, but which was visible enough. Because if you do not have that paper, Mr. Ainsley, you are a trespasser. And a trespasser on a Montana ranch is a man who has already made a very serious mistake. You hear me, sir? You hear me, Mr. Ainsley? Yes, sir, I hear you. Now, do you have the paper? Ainsley swallowed. Not yet, sir. Not yet. I will have it by the end of the week, sir, from the territorial court in Helena. Then you come back at the end of the week, Mr. Thorne. End of the week, Mr. Ainsley, with a paper, signed and sealed. Until then, you turn that buggy around, and you go back the way you came, and you tell Mrs. Beatrice Pemberton in Boston, Massachusetts, that Margaret Holloway and her two minor children are under the roof of a free American on free American land, and there is not a thing she can do about it from 3,000 miles away. Sir, I am obliged to inform you. You are not obliged to inform me of a thing. Turn the buggy. Edmund Ainsley turned the buggy. He turned it slow. He was a careful man, and a careful man does not show his back any faster than he has to. He was halfway down the road when he stopped and called back. Mr. Thorne, you should know there is a hearing already docketed, 2 weeks from Thursday, in the territorial court in Helena. Mrs. Holloway's presence is required. Silas said nothing. If she does not appear, Mr. Thorne, a warrant will issue. Federal marshals will serve it. You cannot stand against federal marshals. Silas said nothing. Good day, Mr. Thorne. The buggy rolled away. Silas Thorne stood on his porch until the dust settled. Then he stood there a while longer because his knees would not quite hold him up. 2 weeks from Thursday. Federal marshals. He went back inside. He bolted the door. He walked down the hall and rapped twice on the cellar trap. It is me. Come up. The bolt slid. Maggie came up first. The spare rifle was in her hand, the one Silas had forgotten he owned. Theo came up behind her, with Evie wrapped in a blanket against his small chest, and the 4-year-old's pale face peered out of the blanket with eyes that were too big for her face. but were no longer the eyes of a dying child. Ma'am, who was it? A lawyer, Mr. Edmund Ainsley, Boston man, Beatrice Pemberton's. Maggie's face did not change. That was the worst part. Her face did not change. It only set. What did he say? Silas looked at her. He looked at the boy. He looked at the little girl in the blanket. He could lie. He could say the lawyer had come for an unrelated matter. He could say the lawyer had been turned around without trouble. He could say a great many things, and Margaret Holloway, who had no reason yet not to trust him, would have believed him, and she would have slept 3 more hours tonight than she was about to sleep. He did not lie. He has a court date in Helena, 2 weeks from Thursday. He has not yet got a paper that lets him on this land. He will have one by Saturday. Maggie's face still did not change. If I do not appear in Helena, a warrant. Federal marshals. She nodded once. The nod of a woman who had already known that this was coming, who had been waiting for it, who had been waiting for it for 15 months. Mama. Theo. Yes, baby. Are they going to take us? No, baby. They are not going to take us. How do you know, Mama? Maggie did not answer her son. She looked instead at Silas Thorne, who was standing in the hall of his own house with his rifle in one hand and his hat in the other, and she asked him the question with her eyes that she did not ask with her mouth, and Silas Thorne answered it the only way he knew how to answer it. He nodded. Once. He would later remember that nod as the moment he decided, not as the moment he agreed, as the moment he decided. That night after the children were asleep, Silas Thorne sat at the kitchen table with the good rifle laid out on a square of clean cloth, and he opened his cleaning kit, and he began to oil the barrel. He had not cleaned that rifle in 2 years. He had not cared whether the rifle could fire. He had not cared whether anything around him could fire, including himself. He cleaned it, now slow and methodical and careful, the way a man cleans a rifle he intends to use. Maggie sat down across from him. She did not pick up her coffee. She watched his hands. She watched the rag move. She watched the oil shine darken on the cloth as the rifle gave up 2 years of neglect. Silas. Yes, ma'am. I want to tell you what happened to my husband. Maggie. You said another night. Tonight is another night. He set the cleaning rod down. He looked at her. All right. His name was Jonathan Pemberton. He was a carpenter. He was 31 years old. And he did not fall, Silas. No, ma'am. He was on a roof in Chicago on the 3rd of November the year before last. He was working for a man named Callahan, who paid him 40 cents a day and owed him 3 weeks' wages. Jonathan went up there that morning to ask for what he was owed. He came down an hour later with his neck broken. Maggie, the foreman said he slipped. Did he? There was another man on the roof, Silas, a big man, Callahan's brother-in-law. Jonathan had words with him before he went up. Theo heard those words. Theo was 7.5 years old, and he was sitting on the curb across the street waiting for his daddy. And he heard every word. What were the words? Jonathan said, I will take you to the law if I have to. And Callahan's brother in law said, the law ain't up on that roof. Silas closed his eyes. Maggie, they ruled it an accident. They paid the burial. They paid nothing else. And when Beatrice Pemberton came to the funeral, she took one look at our 2-room flat and said, in front of my children, this is what my son died for. To leave his babies in a hovel. Jesus, I told her to get out of my house. You did right. I told her never to come back. Yes, ma'am. 3 months later, the papers came. Custody papers. Notice of unfitness. Signed by a judge in Boston who had never seen me, never seen my children, never seen the flat she had called a hovel, a judge who went to dinner at her table twice a month. Silas opened his eyes. So you ran. I sold everything I owned, Silas. Jonathan's tools, his Sunday coat, my mother's wedding ring. I bought a train ticket west as far as the money would go. Then I bought a wagon. Then I walked. I kept walking until the wagon broke down in a dry creek bed 4 miles from a shack nobody had lived in for 20 years. And the shack is where Theo found us. The shack is where I was going to die, Silas. I want you to hear that part clean. I was not going to live through another week in that place. I was going to die. And my children were going to die. And the woman in Boston was going to put a marble headstone over 3 graves and tell her friends at her Monday luncheon that she had done her Christian best. Silas Thorne looked at her for a long, long time. Maggie. Yes, she is not going to put a headstone over you. Silas. Margaret Holloway. Hear me. She is not going to put a headstone over you or your boy or your girl. Not while I am drawing breath on this side of the grass. Her jaw shook. She clamped it still. You do not know what she is. I know exactly what she is. She is a woman who has already buried one person she loved, and she cannot abide a world where anybody tells her no. I grew up under a man exactly like that. I know the breed. Your father, my father. Dead these 20 years, and the world a better place for it. Maggie stared at him. Silas Thorne, you are the strangest man I have ever met in my life. That has been said. Drink your coffee. Yes, ma'am. He drank. She drank. The rifle gleamed dully on the cloth between them. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass. Somewhere down the hall, a 4-year-old slept in a bed she had no right to be in. A 9-year-old slept on the floor beside her because he had not yet been able to bring himself to sleep more than 10 feet from his sister. And Margaret Holloway sat across from a man she had known for 5 days and looked at his rifle on his table and thought very clearly that this was the first time in her life she had sat at the table with a man and not been afraid of what he was going to do next. Silas, she said after a long quiet, yes, I want to tell you something about Theo. All right. He has not been a child since November the 3rd 2 winters ago. He has been a small adult. He has watched me. He has watched his sister. He has watched the door of every room we have ever slept in the way a man watches a door. He has not laughed since the day his daddy fell. He has not cried neither, not where I could see, I figured. But this morning, out there in the barn, yes, ma'am, he cried, yes, ma'am. She drew a breath. She let it out. I do not know what you said to him, Silas. I do not need to know. I want to know, but I do not need to know. What I need to say, what I have come in here to say is that I heard him cry, and I had not heard my son cry in 2 years, and I did not know until this morning that I was going to live through hearing him cry again. Maggie, I wept in the kitchen. Yes, ma'am. I wept in your wife's apron. Yes, ma'am. And I am telling you this so that you know. Know what? That you have already done the thing my husband died trying to do. You have made my son cry. Silas Thorne lowered his head. It was the only thing she could have said in that order in those words that would have unlocked the rest of him. She had said it because she had meant it, but she had also said it because she was a woman of a certain age and a certain history, and she had been watching him for 5 days now, and she had taken his measure, and she had decided what kind of unlocking he needed. He sat at his own kitchen table with his head down, and he did not say anything for a long time. And Margaret Holloway did not rush him because Margaret Holloway had learned in 15 months of waiting for a hammer to fall that there is a kind of silence between two people that is its own answer. When Silas raised his head again, his face was wet. He had not cried in 3 years. He cried now. He cried quiet. He cried the way a man cries when he has forgotten how. And so the tears come, the way water comes through a fence post, slow and unfamiliar, and not under his control. He did not put his head in his hands. He did not turn his face away. He let her see it. Maggie reached across the table. She put her hand on his. She did not squeeze. She did not move. She just laid her hand flat on the back of his rough, scarred, weathered hand, the way you lay a hand on a stone in the sun, and she left it there until he was done. Silas, she said. Ma'am, I am sorry about your boy. Yes, ma'am. I am sorry I do not have the words. You have them, Maggie. You have just been using them. She nodded. Her eyes were bright. She did not look away. We have 1 week. I know. 6 days, really. Until that hearing. Yes, ma'am. What are we going to do? He looked at her. He looked at his rifle on the cloth. He looked at the kitchen window where the dark country was lying out under the stars. He had ridden alone for 3 years. We are going to walk into that courtroom in Helena, Maggie, you and me and Theo and Evie. You are going to be wearing a clean dress. Theo is going to be wearing a clean shirt. Evie is going to be sitting on your lap. And we are going to stand in front of that judge. And you are going to tell him exactly what you told me tonight. And I am going to stand beside you while you tell him. Silas. Beatrice has lawyers. I know. She has money. I know. She has a judge in Boston who eats at her table. The judge in Helena does not eat at her table, Maggie. The judge in Helena is a man named Cyrus Whitlock, and I have known him for 11 years, and I have not asked him for a thing in all that time. I am about to ask him for one thing. He owes me one thing. What thing? I pulled his boy out of a frozen river in the winter of '79. The boy lived. Cyrus Whitlock has been waiting 11 years to be asked. Maggie's hand was still on his. You did not tell me that. There has not been a reason to tell anyone that, Maggie. There is now. Silas. Yes, ma'am. You are going to walk into that courtroom for me. I am going to walk into that courtroom with you. That is not the same thing. It is to me. She looked at him. Her hand pressed once on the back of his hand. Then she lifted it away. All right, she said. All right then. She stood up. She gathered the cups. She set them in the basin. At the doorway to the hall, she stopped and she turned back to him with her hand on the doorframe. Silas. Ma'am. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Good night, Mr. Thorne. Good night, Mrs. Holloway. She went down the hall to the room where her children slept, and she eased the door open, and she stood for a long time looking at them, and Silas Thorne sat at his kitchen table and finished cleaning his rifle, and he did not cry again. But he also did not stop feeling what he had felt, and the difference between the two was a difference he had not known a man could feel inside one chest at the same time. Outside the house, the dry country lay out flat under all those stars. Somewhere 15 miles north, Edmund Ainsley was sitting in a hotel room in town, writing a letter to Boston by lamplight. Somewhere 3 miles south, Hollis Wainwright was asleep in his own bed beside his own wife, and his own wife had asked him at supper why he had ridden up to the Thorn place the night before, and Hollis had answered her honestly, the way he always answered her honestly, and his wife Martha had wept into her napkin and then said very quiet, "Lord, be praised, my Cora's prayer is finally answered." And in Boston, in a house of 22 rooms, a 62-year-old woman with white hair and a straight back was sitting up in her bed, reading a telegram from Montana that had arrived by messenger at 10 o'clock at night, and the telegram said only, "Subject located. Local rancher harboring. Hearing on schedule." And Beatrice Pemberton folded that telegram in half, and she set it on her bedside table beside the picture of her dead son, and she turned out the lamp, and in the dark she said out loud to nobody, to the room, to the absent face of the boy in the picture, "I am bringing them home, Jonathan. I am bringing them home." She did not yet know what the man in Montana was made of. She would know in 8 days. In Silas Thorne's kitchen the lamp burned low. The rifle gleamed. The clean rag lay folded beside it. The cup on the kitchen shelf with the name scratched into the side stood where it had stood for 3 years. But it was not the same cup it had been a week ago, because nothing in that kitchen was the same as it had been a week ago, including the man at the table. He sat there a long time. When he finally stood up, he carried the lamp down the hall. He stopped the way he had been stopping every night for 5 nights. Now at the second door on the right. He listened. He heard 3 slow, even breaths, the breath of a woman who had finally allowed herself to sleep, the breath of a boy who had cried for the first time in 2 years, the breath of a 4-year-old girl whose fever had broken on his quilt. Silas Thorne lifted his hand. He laid his palm flat on the door for a long moment. He did not open it. He did not need to. He had already opened it once, and the door had not stayed closed since. And it was not going to stay closed again as long as he was alive in this house. He whispered against the wood, so quiet that nobody on the other side could possibly have heard him. "Wesley, we are going to fight for them, son. You hold on to your mama for me wherever you are. We are going to fight for them." Then he went to bed. He slept 4 hours. He woke at 3 in the morning with a clear head, for the first time in 3 years, and he lay in the dark on top of the quilt of the bed he had not been able to lie inside of since Cora died, and he stared at the ceiling and he made a list in his mind of everything he was going to need to do in the next 6 days. Saddled the second horse for Hollis Wainwright at first light. Sent Hollis to Helena with a letter for Cyrus Whitlock. Opened the chest at the foot of the bed for the first time in 3 years, and take out the blue Sunday dress that Cora had told him the week before she died not to leave sitting forever. Open the drawer in the kitchen sideboard and take out the brass cufflinks his boy had worn to his last Easter service. Buy a clean shirt in town for Theo child-sized. Buy a hair ribbon for Evie. Find his own black coat, the one he had worn to Cora's funeral and had not worn since, and beat the dust out of it on the porch rail, and then walk into the courthouse in Helena on Thursday morning with 3 people he had known for 11 days at his side, and stand up when the judge asked him to stand up and say a thing out loud that he had not yet said even to himself. He turned his head on the pillow. The eastern window was beginning just barely to gray. What kind of man am I now? A widower, a rancher, or just a ghost still wearing his own boots? He answered himself in the dark for the first time in 3 years. A father, he said. A husband, maybe, if she will have me. A man who is about to find out. He got up. He started his 6th day. 6 days went fast. They went the way days go when a man has finally decided what he is doing with them. And Silas Thorne, who had moved through 3 years of mornings the way a horse moves through deep snow, moved through these 6 mornings the way a horse moves on hard ground in October, with his head up and his stride lengthened and his ears forward. Hollis Wainwright rode out before sunrise on Sunday. The letter for Judge Cyrus Whitlock was inside Hollis's coat against his chest, and the letter said only what a letter from Silas Thorne to Cyrus Whitlock had to say, which was 11 years' worth of unspoken accounting in 3 short paragraphs and a single closing line. Hollis read the letter before he sealed it because Silas had asked him to. Hollis was not a man who read other men's letters as a rule, but he was also not a man who refused a friend a thing, and when he had finished reading, he had folded it carefully and looked up at Silas across the kitchen table and said, "Only Silas Thorne, you have not asked a man for a thing in 11 years. I will not let this letter touch any other hand but the judge's." And Silas had said, "I know you will not, Hollis." And Hollis had said, "Martha will sit with the woman tomorrow if you will let her." And Silas had said, "I would be obliged." And that had been the whole of it. Martha Wainwright came up to the ranch on Monday morning with a basket of preserves and a black bonnet on her gray head, and a face that had not been into Silas Thorne's kitchen in 3 years and 4 months. She walked up the porch steps the way a woman walks up steps she has waited a long time to climb. She set the basket down on the porch rail. She knocked the way a stranger knocks. She had decided somewhere on the road over from her own place that she was going to give this house every courtesy a stranger would give it. Silas opened the door. Martha. Silas. It has been a while. It has, Silas. You let me in. He let her in. Martha Wainwright walked through the front room without looking at the rocker by the stove, and without looking at the bookshelf, and without looking at the tin cup on the kitchen shelf, the way a woman who had been Cora Thorne's dearest friend on this earth would walk through the room of a man she had been waiting 3 years to walk back into. She did not cry. She did not slow. She walked straight to the kitchen and she put the basket down on the table, and she turned around and she opened her arms. Silas Thorne stepped into those arms the way a 42-year-old man does not step into anyone's arms in front of anybody. But there was nobody else in the kitchen at that moment. Maggie was down the hall with Evie. Theo was at the barn, and Silas Thorne, who had not been held by another human being since the morning he had buried his wife, let an 81-year-old woman put her thin, strong arms around him for the count of about 7 heartbeats, and he did not say anything, and she did not say anything, and when she let him go, she only patted him once on the chest, right over the place. His heart was the way you pat a horse you have been waiting a long time to see again. Now, then, she said, "Yes, ma'am." "Where is she?" "Down the hall, ma'am. You go on now to the barn with the boy. I will introduce myself." "Yes, ma'am." "Silas," she said when he was at the back door. "Ma'am, Cora would be proud of you." He stopped with his hand on the latch. He did not turn around. He could not have turned around just then. But he nodded once, and Martha Wainwright saw him nod, and she let him go out the back door without making him say anything, because 81 years of being a wife and a widow had taught her exactly what a man can and cannot say in any given doorway. By the time Silas came back from the barn an hour later, Margaret Holloway was sitting at his kitchen table with Martha Wainwright's hand on top of hers, and Martha was telling Maggie a story about Cora Thorne that Silas himself had not heard in 7 years, and Maggie was laughing. Maggie was actually laughing. The sound of it stopped Silas in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment with his hat in his hand and listened to a sound he had not heard in his kitchen in 3 years, and he did not interrupt it because there were sounds. A man let go on as long as they wanted to go on. By Tuesday evening, 11 ranchers and their wives had been told by Martha Wainwright in her best Sunday voice, and by Hollis Wainwright in his slow, careful one, exactly what kind of woman Margaret Holloway was, and exactly what kind of man Silas Thorne had become in 11 days, and exactly which side of the courtroom they were going to sit on come Thursday morning. Nobody asked any of those 11 families to do this. Nobody had to. Silas Thorne had pulled their calves out of snowbanks for 15 winters, had sat up with their fevered children at 3 in the morning, had buried their dead beside his own wife in the cottonwood grove behind the church, and he had never once asked them for a thing back. They knew what kind of accounting was owed, and they were ready to settle it. On Wednesday night, Silas opened the chest at the foot of the bed. He did it alone. He had asked Maggie not to come into the room. She had understood. She had taken the children to the kitchen and given them honey on bread, and read to them from an almanac because there was no children's book in that house. And she had understood, without being told, that what was happening at the foot of the bed was a thing a man had to do by himself. The chest had not been opened in 3 years. Inside folded, the way Cora had folded them, ordered the way Cora had ordered them, and still smelling faintly of the lavender she had pressed between the layers, were the dresses, the everyday dresses on top, the Sunday dresses underneath, and at the very bottom, folded with the most care, the blue Sunday dress with the cream-colored lace at the collar that Cora had worn the last Easter she was alive, and had worn one time after that on the morning Wesley was christened. Silas Thorne lifted that dress out with both hands. He held it for a long time. He had not held a thing of Cora's in 3 years. The lavender smell came up through the cloth and into his face, and for one moment, for one whole long moment, he could see her at the foot of the bed, in that dress with her hair pinned up the way she had liked it pinned, and her hand on the back of the chair, and her head turned toward him, with the quiet, patient question on her face. That had been the thing he had loved best about her face from the first day he met her. Cora, he said. He had not said her name out loud in 3 years. He had said it in his head 1,000 times. He had said it against the cold pillow at 3 in the morning when there was nobody to hear. But he had not said it out loud in his own voice, in his own kitchen, in his own bedroom, since the morning he had said it last over a fresh grave in late October of 1881. He said it again, now into the empty room, into the lavender, into the dress. Cora, he said, I am giving the blue dress away. I am giving it to a woman who needs it. You told me to. The week before you went, you told me to. I could not do it then. I am doing it now. I am sorry it took 3 years. I am sorry it took a barefoot boy on the porch. I am sorry. Cora, I am sorry. He folded the dress over his arm. He carried it down the hall. Maggie was at the kitchen table with Theo and Abby. She looked up. She saw the dress over his arm. She saw the lavender. She saw the look on his face, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped, and she met him in the middle of the front room. Silas. Take it, Maggie. Silas this. Take it. She told me to. The week before she died. She told me do not let these dresses sit forever. A woman should wear them who is not ashamed to be alive. I could not do it then. I can do it now. You wear this in Helena tomorrow. You wear it for her and you wear it for you. Maggie reached out. She did not take it. She put her hand on the cloth very gently, the way you touch. A thing you have been told is sacred. Her eyes were wet. Silas Thorne. Yes, I will wear it like it is my own. That is what she would want, Maggie. He put the dress in her hands. He did not stay in the front room. He did not trust himself to stay. He walked out onto the porch, and he stood at the porch rail with his hat in his hand, and he watched the eastern stars come up over the dry country, and he did not move until Theo, in his small bare feet, came out and stood beside him and put one small hand on the rail beside Silas's big one, and did not say anything for a long time. Mr. Silas. Yes, son. Are we going to win? Silas Thorne looked at the boy. The boy's face in the porch light was the face of a child who had asked the question with the whole weight of his 9 years behind it. And Silas Thorne understood that a lie would not do, and that a maybe would not do, and that the only thing that would do for Theo Holloway tonight was the truth. Son, I do not know. Theo nodded. The nod of a boy who had already known that but who needed to hear it from a man. But Silas said, Yes, sir. I am going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, and I am going to do everything a man can do, and so is your mamma, and so are you, and so is everybody we know in this county. And if we lose, son, we will not lose, because we did not try. Yes, sir. Are you scared? Yes, sir. Good. Be scared. A man who is not scared in a courtroom tomorrow is a fool. You be scared, and you stand up anyway. That is the whole job. Yes, sir. Theo's small hand stayed on the rail. After a moment, Silas put his big hand over it. Mr. Silas. Yes, son. If we win. Yes, son. Are you going to be my dad? Silas Thorne did not answer for a long time. Theo waited. Theo had his father's patience, which Silas had noticed 3 days ago and had not yet remarked on. Son Silas said, Yes, sir. Your daddy is your daddy. That does not change. That is not going to change. Yes, sir. But if your mama will have me, and if you will have me. Yes, sir, I would be honored. The boy's chin trembled just once. He clamped it still. He nodded. Yes, sir. They stood there at the piping rail for a long time. Thursday came raw and cold with the first thin snow of the season. The wagon was hitched at 4 in the morning. Silas Thorne's black funeral coat had been beaten clean on the porch rail the night before, and it hung now on his broad shoulders like a coat that knew where it was going. Theo Holloway wore a clean white shirt that Silas had ridden into town and bought for him on Tuesday, and the brass cufflinks Wesley Thorne had worn to his last Easter service were buttoned at the wrists, and the cuffs were a little too long for the boy's 9-year-old arms, and Silas had buttoned them himself in the gray dawn light of his kitchen, and had not been able to speak for a full minute afterward. Margaret Holloway came down the hall in the blue Sunday dress. She had pinned her hair up the way Cora had used to pin hers up, and she had done it without knowing Cora had pinned it that way. And Silas Thorne, standing in the front room with his hat in his hand, looked at her once and then looked away because his throat had closed, and he could not afford to have his throat closed yet. Maggie, Silas, you ready? I am ready. Evie came down the hall behind her in a small wool coat, the color of cranberry that Martha Wainwright had brought up from town the day before because Martha Wainwright was not going to let a 4-year-old child go to her own custody hearing in a blanket. Evie's small hand was in her mother's. Her eyes were huge. She was 4 years old, and she did not understand any of what was about to happen, but she understood the silence in the front room, and she understood the way Mr. Silas was looking at her mamma, and she said, in her bright, clear 4-year-old voice, Mr. Silas, you look nice. Silas Thorne smiled. It was a small smile. It was the first smile he had smiled in front of another human being in 3 years. So do you, little one. So does Mama. Yes, baby. So does Mama. They drove into Helena. The territorial courthouse was full to the back doors. Word had traveled. A young widow, 2 children, a Boston grandmother with money and lawyers, a reward of $100 in a county where a month's wages was 12, and a quiet rancher who had not been seen in his own town in 3 years, riding in this morning at the head of a wagon with three strangers on the bench beside him, dressed in his black funeral coat, his face set the way a man's face sets when he has finally gotten up off the woodpile he had been sitting on for 36 straight months. 11 ranchers and their wives sat in the second row. Hollis Wainwright was at the end of the row in a clean shirt. Martha Wainwright sat in the front row in her best black bonnet. Her thin gloved hands were folded on her lap. Her face was the face of a woman who had not been to a courthouse in 15 years and was here today because there was nowhere else on earth she would rather have been. Beatrice Pemberton sat at the plaintiff's table. She was 62 years old. Her hair was white. Her back was straight. She wore black the way she had worn black every day for 2 winters now, and her gloves were on her lap, and her hands inside the gloves were folded, the way the hands of a woman who has not asked for anything in 40 years are folded when she is about to ask for the last thing she will ever ask for. She did not look at Margaret Holloway. She did not look at the children. She looked straight ahead at the bench where Judge Cyrus Whitlock was about to sit, and her face was the face of a woman who had crossed 3,000 miles on the strength of a single decision and who was not yet aware that the decision had already somewhere between Boston and the Helena started to give way underneath her. Edmund Ainsley sat beside her in the cream-colored derby hat. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Cyrus Whitlock came in. He was 64 years old. He had a white beard, cropped close, and gray eyes that had seen a great deal in their time, and he sat down at the bench, and he looked at the courtroom, and he looked at Silas Thorne in the front row, and he held Silas's eyes for exactly 2 seconds, and then he looked at his papers. 11 years of unspoken accounting. He had not forgotten. Mr. Ainsley, he said. Edmund Ainsley stood up, and Edmund Ainsley spoke for 2 hours. He used the word hovel 3 times. He used the word unfit 9 times. He used the word mother exactly twice, and both times he put the word alleged in front of it. He read the Boston judge's order. He read the affidavits from the Boston servants. He read a deposition from Beatrice Pemberton's own physician describing the medical inadequacies of a 2-room flat in Chicago for the proper raising of children of Pemberton lineage. He spoke in the precise, careful voice of a man who had been paid a great deal of money to make a great many words sound reasonable, and at the end of 2 hours he sat down and the courtroom was quiet. Mrs. Holloway, Judge Whitlock said, "Have you counsel?" Margaret Holloway stood up. Evie was on her hip. Theo stood beside her in his two large cuffs. Silas Thorne stood up beside her without being asked, because a man who has decided what he is stands up. "Your Honor," Maggie said. Her voice was small but steady. "I do not have a lawyer. I have only myself and the man beside me and my children and the truth. Mrs. Holloway, the truth is admissible in this court. Speak it." But before Margaret Holloway could begin, Silas Thorne spoke. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne, I would ask leave to address this court before Mrs. Holloway speaks." "On what matter, Mr. Thorne?" "A personal matter, Your Honor." The judge looked at him. The judge had not heard Silas Thorne's voice in 11 years. The judge had once watched Silas Thorne carry his own 7-year-old boy out of the Missouri River with that boy's blue lips already gone gray, and the judge had carried the memory of that morning around inside his chest every day since. And the judge knew the moment Silas Thorne said the words "personal matter" exactly which account was about to be settled, and the judge nodded once. "Proceed, Mr. Thorne." Silas Thorne did not face the judge. He turned. He faced Margaret Holloway. The courtroom went still. In the particular way courtrooms go still when something is about to happen that is not in the procedure book. The 11 ranchers in the second row leaned forward. Martha Wainwright's hand came up to her mouth. Evie on her mother's hip looked up at Silas with her 4-year-old eyes. Maggie Silas said, "Silas." 3 years ago, Silas said, his voice low and clear and steady, the way a man's voice gets when he has rehearsed the words at 3 in the morning for 6 straight nights. 3 years ago I put my wife in the ground, and my son beside her, and I have not spoken their names out loud to a living soul in all the time since. I have not sat at my own table with another human being. I have not opened the door of my boy's room until 11 days ago when your son knocked on mine. Silas, please. I have not lived, Maggie. I have only continued. 11 days ago, a barefoot boy collapsed on my porch, and 4 hours later I was sitting in a line shack in the dark with your daughter's fever under my hand, and you looked at me across a cracked table, and you asked me what I was. And I did not have an answer then. Silas, I have one now. The courtroom was perfectly still. "I am a man who wants to marry you, Margaret Holloway, not for a judge, not for a paper, not for a strategy against a woman in a Boston hat. I am asking because I woke up this morning in a house that had a child's laugh in it for the first time in 3 years, and I cannot go back to the quiet. I will not go back to the quiet. I am asking you to marry me because you and your children brought me back from the grave, and the man does not walk away from the hands that pulled him out. Maggie's whole face was wet. Silas Thorne. Yes, ask me again. Margaret Holloway. Will you marry me? She held Evie tighter against her shoulder. She reached out her free hand. She took his. Yes. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order, order. I will clear this room. The 11 ranchers in the second row were on their feet. Martha Wainwright was weeping into her gloves and not pretending otherwise. Hollis Wainwright was smiling for the first time anyone in that courtroom had seen him smile in a year and a half. The bailiff was trying to keep order without quite knowing what to keep order against. And at the plaintiff's table, Beatrice Pemberton stood up. She stood up the way an old tree stands up against the wind that has been working on it for years. Slowly, once, and then her face, the face that had not broken in 40 years, broke. It broke in the small particular way the face of a woman breaks when she has just understood that she has been on the wrong side of the room for a very long time. She did not weep, not yet, but her gloved hand came up to the back of the chair in front of her, and she held on to that chair the way a woman holds onto a thing that is keeping her on her feet. She sat back down. Edmund Ainsley leaned over to her. He whispered something. She did not hear him. He whispered it again. She raised her hand. Not a slap, not a shove, just a single small lifted palm, and Edmund Ainsley stopped whispering. The judge got the room quiet again. Mr. Thorne, he said. Yes, Your Honor. That was the most irregular address this court has ever heard. Yes, Your Honor. You are aware that a marriage proposal from the floor does not establish legal guardianship of minor children. I am aware, Your Honor. Then why did you make it in this courtroom? Because, Your Honor, I did not want. The first time I said those words to this woman to be a secret, I wanted them said where every living soul could hear them, including the woman at that table who came 3,000 miles to call Mrs. Holloway a bad mother. Mr. Thorne, you will address this court and not opposing counsel's client. Yes, Your Honor. I apologize. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Yes, Your Honor. He sat. Maggie's hand stayed in his. Theo, on her other side, reached across and took hold of Silas's sleeve with both small fists. Mrs. Holloway. Yes, Your Honor. Speak your truth. Margaret Holloway told her story. She told it short. She told it clean. She told it in the voice of a woman who had stopped being afraid of what would happen if she said it out loud. She told the court about a carpenter on a roof in Chicago in November of 1882. She told them about the words Theo had heard from the curb. She told them about the funeral and the flat and the word hovel. She told them about the custody papers signed in Boston by a judge who had never seen her. She told them about the train and the wagon and the dry creek bed and the line shack and the moment she had decided that she was going to lie down in that shack and die rather than have her children taken away from her by a woman who had called her newborn daughter sickly and walked away. She told the judge that she had been wrong about that last part. She told the judge that her son had walked 2 miles for water and that a man had opened a door that he had not opened in 3 years, and that she did not know if that was Providence, but she knew it was something. Then she sat down. The judge nodded once. He looked at Beatrice Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton. Beatrice Pemberton stood up. She stood up alone. Edmund Ainsley reached for her elbow and she shook him off gently but firmly, the way a woman of her standing shook off a thing she did not want. Your Honor, I will not be questioned by my attorney. I will speak for myself. If this court permits, this court permits. She walked very slowly to the witness stand. She was 62 years old, and her back was straight, and every soul in that courtroom watched her walk the way you watch a person walk on a frozen river in spring. She was sworn in. She sat. She looked for the first time in 2 years at Margaret Holloway. Margaret, Mrs. Pemberton, I have wronged you. The courtroom went absolutely still. I have wronged you, Margaret, and I have wronged my grandchildren, and I have wronged the memory of my son, and I have sat in this courtroom for 3 hours and listened to a woman bury her grief in my face, and listened to a man propose marriage in front of a federal judge, because the first time he said those words, he wanted them said in front of me, and I cannot pretend any longer that I came here for the reasons I said I came. Edmund Ainsley stood up. Your Honor, may I request a short recess for my client? Sit down, Mr. Ainsley. Your Honor, sit down. Ainsley sat. Beatrice Pemberton drew a slow breath. My son Jonathan was 31 years old when he died. He was my only child. His father died when Jonathan was 6. I raised him alone. I raised him in a house of 22 rooms with a staff of 9, and I raised him to marry a girl I had chosen for him from a family I had selected when he was 14 years old. And when he was 25, he came home one evening and he said, Mother, I have met a girl named Margaret in a bookshop and I am going to marry her. And I said no, and he married her anyway. and I did not attend the wedding, and I did not meet my first grandchild until he was 3 years old. And I made it known that if Jonathan would come home, bring the girl, bring the boy, live in the house I had kept for him, I would welcome them, and if he would not, I would not. He would not. He moved to Chicago. He took work as a carpenter. My son, who had been educated at Harvard, who could have had any office in Boston, took work climbing roofs for 40 cents a day because he said he wanted to earn his own bread. Because he said he was not going to take another dollar from his mother's hand until his mother learned to love his wife. She paused. She closed her eyes. He died before I learned. When I heard he had fallen, I was in my drawing room taking tea with the bishop's wife. I did not weep. I did not make a sound. I set down the cup and I walked upstairs and I closed the door of my bedroom and I stayed in that room for 11 days. And when I came out, I was not a grieving mother anymore. I was a woman with the purpose. I was going to bring my son's children home. I was going to raise them in his rooms. I was going to undo with two small bodies every decision he had made that had taken him away from me. She opened her eyes. She looked at Theo. She looked at Evie. I was going to replace him. Margaret Holloway's free hand had come up to her mouth. Margaret, stand up. Maggie stood up. Silas stood up with her because he could not make himself let go of her hand. Margaret, I came to Chicago for Jonathan's funeral. I looked at your home and I called it a hovel. I looked at your baby in the basket and I called her sickly. I looked at you in your black dress and I did not see the woman my son had chosen. I saw an obstacle between me and what was left of him. Yes, ma'am, I was wrong. Yes, ma'am, I was wrong, Margaret. I have been wrong for 2 years. And I watched the little boy stand in this courtroom today, in cuffs that did not fit him. And I have watched for 3 hours a man propose marriage to his mother in front of a federal judge. And I cannot any longer pretend that I am the better grandmother, because I am not. Mr. Thorne laid his whole hand on Evie's head the first minute he saw her. I have not laid one finger on her head in 4 years. Mrs. Pemberton, the judge, said very quietly, Your Honor. Yes, Mrs. Pemberton. I wish to withdraw the petition. The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. I wish to withdraw it with prejudice. I wish this court to enter on the record that I have no claim on these children, that I renounce any future claim, and that Margaret Holloway is their mother, sole and entire, and that she shall determine their upbringing without any interference from me or any representative of mine. Edmund Ainsley half rose. Mrs. Pemberton, you are dismissed, Mr. Ainsley. Ma'am. Dismissed. Ainsley sat. He looked like a man who had been slapped. Your Honor, Beatrice said. Mrs. Pemberton, I would ask one thing of this court. Name it. I would ask that the withdrawal of my petition not be entered as an admission against me in any matter of my son's estate. Jonathan's children are the legal heirs of their father, and their father was the heir of his father, and whatever their mother's circumstances, those two children are heirs to a not inconsiderable fortune. I would ask this court direct the executor of my estate, which is myself, to place that inheritance in trust today, in the name of Margaret Holloway, to be administered for the benefit of her children on such terms as she shall direct. The courtroom erupted again. The gavel cracked. Margaret Holloway's knees gave out. Silas caught her elbow. Evie started to cry, a small confused sound, and Maggie sat down with her daughter in her lap and stared at Beatrice Pemberton as if she had never seen her before. Mrs. Pemberton, Margaret, I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not expect to receive it. I will not come to your door. I will not write to your children. If at any time when they are grown they wish to know their father's mother, I will be in Boston, in the house where he grew up. I will not move from it. I will not die until one of them comes, if one of them ever comes. And if neither of them comes, I will die knowing it was my fault. Mrs. Pemberton, do not stop me, Margaret. Let me say it, and let me go. I was not going to stop you. Then what were you going to say? Margaret Holloway's face was wet. I was going to say, come to supper. Beatrice's gloved hand went to her mouth. Margaret, not today, not tomorrow, when you can, when you have packed a proper bag, when you have something in your suitcase besides a custody petition. Come to supper, Beatrice Pemberton. Come and meet your granddaughter. Come and hold her. She is 4 years old, and she has never been held by her father's mother, and that is a thing that can still be mended. And the boy in those cuffs is 9 years old, and he sang every morning for as long as he could remember with his daddy before his daddy died, and nobody in his life has ever sung with him since. His daddy's voice is in yours, Beatrice. I heard it in the third word you said. Beatrice Pemberton wept. She put her face in her hands and she wept. And she was 62 years old, and she had not wept in front of another human being in 4 decades, and she wept now in a territorial courtroom in Montana on the second Thursday in September of 1884 in front of a judge and a widow and 11 ranchers and a schoolmaster and an 81-year-old woman in a black bonnet, and a child in cuffs that had belonged to a boy who was dead. Judge Cyrus Whitlock cleared his throat. The petition is withdrawn with prejudice per the request of the petitioner. Let the record reflect. The minor children, Theodore Holloway and Eveline Holloway, are remanded to the sole custody of their mother, Margaret Holloway, effective immediately and in perpetuity. The gavel came down. This court stands adjourned. Nobody moved. Nobody moved because Silas Thorne had walked around the table to the witness stand, and he had taken Beatrice Pemberton's hand, the hand of a woman he had never seen before today, a woman who had come 3,000 miles to take the children. He had come to love in 11 days, and he had helped her down from the stand as gently as a man helps his own mother out of a pew on a Sunday morning. Ma'am, Mr. Thorne, supper is at 7, Wednesday, if that suits. Mr. Thorne, your table seats 8. We have not had 8 people at it in 3 years. We will have 7 Wednesday. I would like it to be 8. Beatrice Pemberton looked at him. She looked at Margaret. She looked at Theo in the cuffs. She looked at Evie in the cranberry coat. 7 o'clock, Mr. Thorne. Yes, ma'am. I will bring a pie. Yes, ma'am. I have not baked a pie in 41 years. Then it is past time, ma'am. And Silas Thorne walked Beatrice Pemberton down the aisle of that courtroom with her hand on his arm as if he were walking her into a church and not out of one. And every soul in that room stood up as they passed, and not one of them said a word, because there was not a word in the English language that fit what had just happened in front of them. Wednesday came soft and cold with the second thin snow of the season. Beatrice Pemberton arrived at 10 minutes to 7 in a traveling coat that had cost more than Silas Thorne's best heifer. She climbed down from the rented buggy alone. She carried a pie in both hands. The pie was a little lopsided, and the crust was a little dark on one edge, and she looked down at it as she came up the porch steps and said, before anyone had greeted her, I burned the bottom. I apologize. Margaret opened the door. Come in, Beatrice. Margaret, come in out of the cold. She came in. Silas took her coat. Theo Holloway stood in the front hall in his best shirt, with his hair combed flat, and he looked at his grandmother the way a boy looks at a mountain he has been told about but has never seen. Grandma, Theodore, you came. I came. I was not sure I would. Until the train pulled out of South Station. The boy nodded, very serious, very grown up. I set you a place, Grandma. Thank you, Theodore. I set my daddy a place too. I hope that is all right. Beatrice Pemberton put her gloved hand against the doorframe. She closed her eyes. She stood there for one full, slow breath. Theodore Holloway, she said, when she opened her eyes again. That is the most all right thing anyone has ever done for me in my life. Evie came around the corner then, 4 years old, shy, one small hand wrapped in the folds of her mother's apron. She looked up at the tall, white-haired woman in the front hall, and the tall woman looked down at her, and neither of them moved for a long second. Evie, yes, ma'am. May I hold you? The little girl considered it with the solemn gravity of a judge. Are you my grandma? I am. Mamma said you were. Your mamma was right. Mamma said you did not hold me before. Your mamma was right about that too. Why? Beatrice Pemberton lowered herself onto one knee in the traveling dress on the plank floor of Silas Thorne's front hall. She lowered herself until her face was level with her granddaughter's, and she said, very quiet, very clear, because I was foolish, Evie, and I was proud, and I am sorry. Mama says sorry is a word you have to mean. I mean it, child. Evie thought about this. Then she lifted up both arms. Beatrice. Pemberton gathered her granddaughter against her chest for the first time in 4 years, and she made a sound that was not quite weeping and not quite laughter, and Margaret Holloway turned her face into Silas Thorne's shoulder because she could not watch it and stay standing. Supper was venison and biscuits and a pie with a burned bottom. The plate Theo had set for his father stayed empty, and nobody pretended otherwise. At the end of the meal, Silas Thorne stood up at the head of his own table, and he raised his water glass because there was no wine in the house, and had not been for 3 years, and he said, to Jonathan Pemberton, who raised a son who walked 2 miles, and a daughter who asked hard questions, and a wife who did not die in a creek bed, and a mother who came all the way from Boston with a pie. To Jonathan Pemberton, whose name has been said at this table tonight, and will be said at this table again. They drank water together, all of them. Silas Thorne and Margaret Holloway were married in the little church in town on the first Saturday of December 1884. The church was full to the back doors. Martha Wainwright was matron of honor. Hollis Wainwright stood up for Silas. Beatrice Pemberton sat in the second pew with Evie on her lap, in the new wool coat, the color of cranberries, and the little girl held her grandmother's hand the whole service and did not let go, even when the organ started. Theo walked his mother down the aisle. He was 9 years old, and the cuffs on his shirt were properly sized this time. But he had asked that morning if he could wear Wesley's brass cufflinks one more time. Silas had taken them out of the drawer where they had lain for 3 years, and one autumn now, and he had fastened them on the boy's sleeves with his own hands, and he had not been able to speak for a full minute afterward. Margaret wore Cora Thorne's blue Sunday dress. She had not had it altered. It fit her now as if it had always been hers. At the altar, the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" And Theodore Holloway, in a voice that cracked exactly once and then held steady, said, "I do, sir, with my daddy's blessing and my own." Silas Thorne wept then in front of the whole congregation, and he did not try to hide it. Margaret laid her hand in his. "Margaret Holloway, before God and these people, I take you and your children, not the way a man takes on a burden, the way a man takes back a life. Silas Thorne, I take you, not the way a widow takes shelter, the way a woman comes home." They were pronounced. They kissed once light in front of God and all those people. The congregation stood, and Eveline Holloway, 4 years old, slid down off her grandmother's lap, marched up the aisle, past the rows of ranchers and their wives, tugged on the hem of her mother's dress, and said in a clear, bright 4-year-old voice, loud enough for the back row to hear, "Is Mr. Silas my daddy now?" Margaret bent down. "Do you want him to be baby?" "Yes." "Then he is." Evie considered this. Then she turned small and serious to Silas Thorne, and she lifted up both arms exactly the way she had lifted them for her grandmother in the front hall 4 days earlier. "Up." Silas Thorne picked her up. He settled her on his hip. He walked down the aisle of the little church in Montana Territory with a woman on one arm and a little girl on the other, and Theo walked in front of them with his head high, and the bells rang. And somewhere in the second pew an old woman from Boston laughed and wept at the same time, and could not stop doing either. The first spring on the ranch came soft and green. Abby ran in the yard with a wooden sword, fighting imaginary pirates. Theo learned his letters at the kitchen table from a primer Beatrice had sent from Boston with no card attached. Margaret kneaded bread in the kitchen wearing the apron that had once belonged to Cora, and had been mended now in 3 places by Margaret's own hands. And Silas Thorne rode the fences in the morning and came home for supper at the same hour every night, and he did not sit at the head of the table because the head of the table belonged to a man who had died on a roof in Chicago, and Silas had decided that on the third night of his marriage, and had never sat there since. On Silas Thorne's 43rd birthday in May of 1885, Theo Holloway, who was now 10 years old, came down to the kitchen with both small hands behind his back. Mr. Silas. Yeah, son, this is for you. It ain't much. The legs ain't even. He held out a small carved wooden horse. He had carved it himself in the barn in the lantern light for 6 straight nights. The mane was made of horsehair from the roan's tail. The saddle was leather from a strap Hollis Wainwright had given him, and on the bottom carved deep with the careful hand of a boy who had decided what he was carving before he started were 2 words. My dad. Silas Thorne held that horse in his big, rough hand for a long time. Son, is that all right? What you wrote there? It's all right. If you say it is, sir, it's all right, son. It's all right. He walked across the kitchen. He set the wooden horse in the middle of the mantelpiece, above the stone fireplace, in the place of honor where a man set the thing that mattered most in his house. And the wooden horse stayed there from that day forward, and Silas Thorne did not move it once in the rest of his life. A year later, in the autumn of 1886, Margaret Holloway Thorne gave birth to a boy. They named him Wesley Jonathan Thorne, and they did it without discussing it because there was nothing to discuss. The 2 names had been carried in that house for a long time, and the boy in the cradle deserved both of them. The morning Wesley Jonathan was born, Silas Thorne stood on his porch in the early light with his second son in his arms, and he spoke into the morning he could not see. Wesley, he said, your brother is here. You hold him close wherever you are. We will send him back to you eventually, but not for a long, long time. Then he carried his son back inside, and he walked over to the kitchen shelf, and he took down the tin cup with the name scratched into the side. The cup he had not touched in 5 years, and he set it on the mantelpiece next to the wooden horse with my dad on the bottom. He stood there a long moment looking at the 2 of them together. I did this too, late for my own boy, he said quietly, to nobody, to himself, to the house. But God in heaven, I did not do it too late this time. Beatrice Pemberton came back at Christmas. She came at Easter. She came in the summer of 1885, and again in the autumn, and by the winter of 1886 she had begun very quietly to speak of selling the Boston house. Not all at once, not yet, but by the spring of 1887, when little Wesley Jonathan was 6 months old, and Evie was 7, and Theo was 12, Beatrice Pemberton sold the 22-room house on Beacon Hill and moved into a small cottage Silas Thorne had built for her at the far edge of the yard 200 steps from his back door, close enough that Evie could run to her grandmother in her nightgown on a summer morning and not get her feet cold. Beatrice was 76 years old when she died, It was the winter of 1898. She went peaceful in her sleep with Evie holding her hand, and Theo sitting at the foot of the bed, and Margaret reading the 91st Psalm aloud. And she was buried beside Cora and Wesley under the cottonwood by the creek in a plot Silas Thorne had paid for the summer before and had never told her about. Her headstone read only Beatrice Pemberton. She learned, and the creek, which had gone dry in the drought of '84, had been running full and clean for 14 years by then, and it never went dry again in Silas Thorne's lifetime, or in Margaret's, or in any of their children's, because the well behind the house gave water enough for a whole valley, and the valley knew it, and the valley came. In the spring of 1900, a young reporter from a paper in Helena rode out to the Thorne Ranch on a bay mare to write a story for the Sunday edition. He had heard, he said, that there was a family out here with a story worth telling. He interviewed Silas on the porch. He interviewed Margaret in the kitchen. He interviewed Theo, who was 25 years old now, and the schoolmaster of the schoolhouse in town. He interviewed Evie, who was 20 and engaged to be married. At the end of the afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the young reporter asked Margaret one last question. Ma'am, if you had to sum up your life in one sentence, what would it be? Margaret Thorne thought about it. She looked out the kitchen window at her husband, who was lifting their 14-year-old youngest son onto the back of the old roan mare. She looked at the wooden horse on the mantel and the tin cup beside it. She looked back at the reporter. My son walked 2 miles for water, she said. Ma'am, my 9-year-old boy walked 2 miles through a drought to save his sister's life, and he knocked on a door that had been closed for 3 years, and every single thing you have written down today, everyone in this house is only here because he walked. The reporter wrote it down. The reporter put it at the top of the article. The article was reprinted in 11 papers across the West that year and in the Boston Globe the year after. 40 years later, on the porch in the first thin snow of 1924, Silas Thorne would tell his great grandsons that he could still feel the weight of that little girl on his hip on the way out of that church. He was 82 years old. The wooden horse with my dad on the bottom was on his lap because his great grandson, the youngest one, Theodore's grandson, the 4-year-old, had brought it out to him from the mantel 10 minutes ago and asked him to tell the story. The boy was sitting on the porch boards beside his great grandfather's boots. His name was Silas. He was named for the old man whose lap held the horse. Grandpa. Yes, son. Tell us the story. Silas Thorne looked down at the small blond head at his knee. He looked at the country lying out white under the first snow. He looked at the kitchen window behind him, where Margaret, who was 68 years old now and whose hair was white as the snow outside, was pouring coffee for her husband and pouring it before her own, because she had been pouring his first for 40 years. He looked at the wooden horse in his hand. "All right, son. All right then. I will tell you the story." It was a dry night in September of 1884. I was 42 years old. I had not opened the door of my house in 3 years, and a barefoot boy knocked on it. He had walked 2 miles. His lips were cracked open like dried earth. Silas Thorne told them the story. He told them about the boy on the porch. He told them about the line shack and the 4-year-old girl and the mother with the rifle. He told them about the house in Boston and the woman in the black dress. He told them about the courtroom and the cufflinks and the blue dress. He told them about the store. He told them, "You walk when the people you love are dying. You walk no matter how far, no matter how hot, no matter who answers the door. And somewhere on the other end of that walk, God willing, a door opens, and the life begins again." He walked for all of us. In the kitchen behind him, Margaret Thorne lifted the coffee pot off the stove. Through the window, she could see her husband on the porch with the small head at his knee and the wooden horse in his hand, and she could see his lips moving in the soft, slow way they moved when he was telling the story to a child. And she stood there for a long moment and watched him through the glass. Then she carried the coffee out to the porch. "Silas," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Coffee's ready." "Yes, ma'am." "Coming." He set the wooden horse back in the small hands at his knee. "You hold on to that, son. You hold it for me." "Yes, grandpa." And Silas Thorne stood up slow, the way an 82-year-old man stands up, and he took his coffee from his wife's hand, and the snow came down soft over the porch, and somewhere out behind the cottonwood by the creek, 3 headstones stood quiet under the white. He walked for all of us.